Someone Like You by Holly Uso. In the comité, Nate watched and waited for the right moment to pounce. When Bill approached him for the winning point, Nate told himself, I have to, I want to, I'm going to. In what felt like slow motion, Bill stepped forward while raising his left arm. Nate thought, it's time. Then he exhaled and deflected Bill's weak blow, brushing his arm aside and bulleting forward. Cheetah quick, Bill grabbed Nate's wrist and yanked, using Nate's own momentum to pull him off balance. Nate shifted all his weight toward his heels, but before he could regain balance, Bill swept his right foot hummingbird fast under Nate's feet, knocking him over. He couldn't counter and his ribs crashed into the mat. Ugh, Nate thought, looking at the gymnasium ceiling, panting and wondering how it had come to this. He wasn't the tallest, strongest, or fastest guy on the juniors karate team. He wasn't as tall as his best pal, Harmon, as muscular as Frog, as quick as Taylor, or as lithe as Wong, but it wasn't like him to lose to Bill Martin. It wasn't the closest snack spot, but Harmon liked Bird Rock Creamery because it had Barks root beer and he thought A&W was tired. Nate had another reason to like it, and it wasn't the other customers. Nate walked in first. As the scent of sugar nuzzled around him like a cozy blanket, he scanned the sea of kids and adults, raising his chin to acknowledge the couple of teens he knew. Nate turned toward the counter where she stood. In the golden afternoon sunlight which streamed in through the picture window, Guadalupe's skin looked nearly bronze. Her dark chocolate eyes were animated as she piled scoop after scoop of ice cream onto a half banana, laid out like a sunbather, then drizzled hot fudge and caramel sauce over the whole mess like Jackson Pollock. In Guadalupe's presence, every problem Nate had was swept from his mind. His shoulders relaxed. Unlike the petty girls at school always angling for status, Guadalupe was real. Anyone who spent 5 minutes near her could see that. The other guys caught up, and Nate brushed off Harmon's friendly karate chop to the pecs. Frog jabbered on about some new rap song, but Nate couldn't hold focus. When he was topped out, Frog hit on a nearby red-haired teen, licking a chocolate cone and chatting with a gal pal. Although she gave him zero encouragement, Frog kept pushing, ignoring her signal. Frog couldn't read a signal if it were close as a kangaroo's joey and clear as today's cloudless San Diego sky. So Nate suggested the other guys snag the largest booth, the one with the legroom Frog preferred, and offered to grab the ice cream. Frog told Nate not to be a hater, but with a little shipping from Harmon, Frog went along. Nate half-watched Guadalupe while collecting cash from Taylor, Frog, and Harmon. The string of Guadalupe's baby blue apron took flight as she whipped around to grab a canister of cream. As she turned back, Harmon elbowed Nate. Wong had tossed a crumpled-up 5 in the air, and just in time, Nate turned and caught it. As the guys walked away, Frog made one last comment to the redhead and waggled his tongue. She rolled her eyes. Frog had thought Nate was crazy to break up with Rachel last Friday, but he couldn't trust his teammates' take on life. Frog might suggest running into a twister because it would be exciting. The other guys piled into the largest booth near the front of the shop while Nate waited in the back by bookcases of vintage games and little kid books, in which words didn't get longer or less concrete than cat and boat. As Nate gazed on, Guadalupe tilted her head as she squirted whipped cream on the sundae, making cones like breasts with maraschino cherry nipples. Pleased with her creation, Guadalupe grinned like happiness bubbled up from within her. When a little cherry juice trickled down one white puff of cream, Nate leaned on the long counter holding the edge with both hands. The door opened, and as a few tweens streamed in, the cool air bubble around Nate went tepid. From behind the marbleized counter, Guadalupe crouched as she asked a 5-year-old in a polka dot t-shirt for her order. After a series of ums, the kid asked for a snow cone, but Bird Rock Creamery doesn't serve snow cones. Guadalupe's tongue met her top teeth as she pondered this request. Nate tapped his foot to a Maroon 5 song and imagined himself walking hand in hand with her at Seaport Village or somewhere. He'd make an offhand remark and she'd laugh. It'd feel A.W. awesome. Thinking about Guadalupe was getting to be a bad habit. He thought about her when he should be writing college application essays and finishing the Red Badge of Courage before today's midterm. Last night he'd tried to finish Red Badge, had turned off his cell even, but his thoughts remained on Guadalupe. When he looked up, an hour had passed and he'd barely read one page of the 70 that remained. Then he'd practiced karate forms over and over until he crashed on the bed fast asleep. Nate had made at least B's all year except in physics, but now he couldn't concentrate for anything. He suspected he failed the midterm in 5th period unless his guess about the ending was right. On the essay question, he claimed the main guy wanted to act, but lacked the courage, even though he thought he should play the hero. Maybe the Red Badge guy acted courageously in the end, but Nate doubted it. Anyone could think of a million reasons to chicken out. When Nate was 6, he wanted to pet a shiny fish, but dodged getting in the canoe for fear he'd drown in water barely deep enough to keep the canoe afloat. By the end of the course, Guadalupe presented a vanilla ice cream cone to her pigtailed customer. Here's your cone, what kind of snow do you want? The 5-year-old traced circles on her shoulder. Gummy bear snow. Guadalupe mixed gummy bears into the ice cream and plopped the lump atop the sugar cone. The little girl flashed a missing tooth smile as she accepted the precarious cone, from which gummy bears stuck out at odd angles like they were escaping from Vanilla Ice Cream Mountain. As Guadalupe ran the grandma's credit card, Nate's heart pounded since he was next in line. "You're an angel, Chiquita," the grandma said to Guadalupe, rescuing the cone the child was just about to upend. Wrinkles formed above Guadalupe's eyebrows, her smile flattened. Nate and Guadalupe exchanged a look. The grandma continued oblivious. "Last week this cherub asked for a quesadilla at In-N-Out. She shook her head and the tips of her styled hair tapped her chin. That was one unhappy child. When the little girl walked away smiling, Nate's foot stopped tapping and he stared at the alternating black and white floor tiles intensely, like he was in a Pixar flick and one might suddenly spring to life. As the kid's grandma played keep away with the cone, the girl jumped toward it, but it was kept just out of her reach. "What do you have?" said Guadalupe, closing the cash register with a ka-chuck sound. Nate stepped toward Guadalupe, met her eye, and crinkled the bills in his palm. His throat went dry, and for a moment he was again the weak, unfocused freshman, trying out for karate and so uncoordinated he barely made the team. His eyes darted like an amphibian tongue toward the wall menu while he pressed his lips together, working up his nerve. Guadalupe studied him. "It's a hard choice, for sure." She pronounced sure like shore. Nate found her slight Mexican accent adorable. He swallowed. "Hi. I want 4 of the..." Nate's voice cracked. 4 rot beer. He cleared his throat. I want root beer floats and a thick chocolate, no chocolate, milkshake." She leaned into one hip. 4? Too spooked to speak and risked stumbling on his words again, Nate nodded. She leaned forward, one corner of her mouth turned up. She smelled faintly of cherries. "Lucky, since we're all of rot beer for sure. Plus for that you need ID, and you're about my age." A whoosh of energy shot up his body. He tried not to grin, yet one side of his mouth turned up. "Guess so." Nate pressed his lips together. "She shouldn't call you Chiquita like that. Ha! A brand of banana." Guadalupe bit her lip. "True. She probably doesn't get it's like calling me darling or sweetie pie." "Yeah, she shouldn't have said that," said Nate. She froze for a beat, then shrugged. "Whatever. I'm here helping my uncle." She gazed up. "Right." Nate said. "Sucks." Guadalupe met his eye. "Yeah, a little. Hey, you can't let the haters get you down." She rubbed her palms together, then grabbed a tall silver cup and stabbed the belly of a rectangular pan of chocolate ice cream with a silver scoop. She blew a bit of brown hair out of her eye. Who is not going along with this crowd? Her "this" sounded like "this." He sidestepped and tapped his sternum twice. "Me." Under her hands, the silver scoop peeled a thick ribbon of ice cream from the block and left a trough in the pan. Her arm muscles got taut as she dragged the scoop toward her, bearing down with one hand atop the other. She pressed her lips together, absorbed in the task. God, she looked appealing. He thought, You can do this. You have to do this." A scenester tween staring at his cell phone walked right into Nate. He put his hands up and the spike-haired kid bounced off. Each time Guadalupe leaned forward in her striped uniform and apron, Nate noticed her curves. He was right to ditch Rachel, who he knew had flirted with that college guy deliberately while they waited in line for the movie last week, hoping to be fought over. That was whack. Guadalupe scooped the rest of the ice cream into the tall silver cup, then she half turned toward him and flashed a shy smile. When her eyes met his knees felt unsteady. He heard a text arrive on his smartphone and didn't even glance down. As Guadalupe added milk and chocolate syrup to the shake, a metal clanging noise sounded behind Nate. She checked out the scene, so Nate did too. At the largest booth where his karate pals sat, a cup of spoons had knocked against a silver napkin dispenser. Frog had wrapped his forearms around Harmon's shoulders and bent him backwards. Nate shook his head. Those cut-ups, he thought. Harmon laughed as Frog released him, then karate chopped toward Frog's midsection, but Frog dodged. He darted toward the front of the store and bumped hips with a waifish tween in mid-text, one of 7 people behind Nate in the growing line. The tween looked familiar. How many junior high girls had maroon streaked hair? Nate turned to face Guadalupe and leaned into the counter, shifting most of his weight into the heels of his hands. Her dark eyes and full lips made her seem exotic. She might not consider a nothing special guy like him, or she might say yes, and he'd bet that being with her would be exhilarating, like riding a bike fast with no hands. Better. As Nate's shake blended, Guadalupe's torso moved in time to the rock music, and she mouthed the words during the chorus. He marveled at her unself-conscious act. That's the moment he realized he'd lost the match because of her. He couldn't concentrate on anything else. Not writing essays, not reading, not the match. He leaned away from the counter. Asking her out felt scary, yet exhilarating. Forget stage karate chops with rule followers in his weight class on regulation-sized mats. This was a giga risk. He had no idea what his chances were with her. Guadalupe shifted from one baby blue sneaker to another as she turned back to the blender, her face partly turned away. He caught that look on her face that made him so curious about her. A warmth spread through his chest. Even though pursuing her was laced with uncertainty, he didn't think he could sidestep the risk. And this was his moment to ask her out. Behind him, a tot half climbed up a dad's leg, and the socializing tweens who tapped their screens furiously would not be kept waiting. It hit Nate how he knew the tween. That's Rachel's kid sister, he thought, the one with over 1,000 Twitter followers. He looked again. The 13-year-old glanced up from her phone, and as she eyed Nate, her thumbs paused. It's Hannah, he thought. She posted tons of selfies with fake vampire teeth marks on her neck. At least he assumed they were fake. He pressed harder into the counter until he could have nearly lifted his feet off the ground. He could not ask Guadalupe out with Rachel's bite mark-obsessed sisters standing nearby. Hannah would definitely notice if Guadalupe shot him down, and word would spread to the douchies, burly seniors who'd enjoy poking fun at him without mercy, perhaps taking a swing. Nate's heart raced. I should keep my trap shut, he thought. As Guadalupe reached for a fourth goblet and set it on a tray, she looked at him with an openness, and his resolve to play it safe dissolved. He was no longer a 6-year-old scared to drown in a shallow lake, or a shaky-kneed freshman. He was something else. He thought, I have to, I want to, I'm going to. Guadalupe tapped the bottom of the silver cup as she decanted his milkshake into a fifth goblet, which she set in front of him. Facing him, she shook the canister of cream. He thought, it's time, and pushed the counter away, rocking onto his heels. He hooked a hand on his opposite shoulder in a half hug. Guadalupe, would you? Guadalupe squirted a surge of whipped cream onto his shake that went out of control and overflowed the glass. She bit her lip and looked from him to the milkshake. Nate removed the hand from his shoulder, picked up the glass, and licked the drip off the side. Delish. They held eye contact for a moment, but to Nate it felt like a year. How do you? She retracted her chin. Know my name? The gruff man says it. Nate made a serious face, thoughtfully rubbing where a goatee would be, and imitated the man's deep voice. One more tray of banana cream. She let a puff of air escape. Her head circled forward as she chuckled. He's a sweetheart. My Uncle Sal, he creates all this. She motioned to 20 pans of ice cream and the display of candy-dipped chocolate waffle cones like Vanna White. I really should be polishing my college entrance essays, but Mom says you help family, and she's right. She bit the side of her lip a little and whispered, Kfir. Nate pushed back from the counter and collided with a chair, which fell over. He barely felt the pain. You know my name? Nate pressed his lips together. I never knew you'd notice. Someone like you. Guadalupe had that look of delight on her face, the one that drew him to her. She held eye contact for an instant. Nate grabbed the toppled chair, nearly falling over, like he'd forgotten how to stand. He felt like he had in the kumite, off balance before his opponent stepped on the mat. He made several jerky arm and leg movements in an effort to maintain his balance. An Asian tween with long bangs and a lip stud laughed and pointed as Nate wrangled the chair into position and slid it under the table. As Nate awkwardly stepped up to the counter, a freckled tween with red blonde Brillo pad hair held up his hand like a stop sign. Whoa, dude, don't do the freaky robot over here. Nate stood frozen, eyes glued to the counter, jaw clenched. Each second felt like a minute. Yoing, 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 mocked the freckled teen. As the music changed to Rihanna, Guadalupe turned away and scooped ice cream into 4 goblets. As she poured root beer over the ice cream, tan foam formed atop, the chestnut brown bottom layer marbled with blobs of cream. Nate gazed at the ivory foam that kept growing after she stopped pouring. Guadalupe pushed the tray of floats forward. That'll be $24.57. His thumb quivered as he slid the crumpled 5s across the counter. I cannot ask her out now after being so clumsy, Nate thought. As she pressed buttons on the register, she thinks I'm a spastic robot dancer, he told himself. She remembered my last name. But if she ever liked me, she probably changed her mind a minute ago. Probably. As she neatly filed the money, he stared at the counter. He felt like the stupidest, most awkward guy alive. Guadalupe slid her fingers into the register and pulled out a quarter, dime, nickel, and 3 pennies. Nate wanted to speak, but the thumping in his chest felt like it pulsed in his brain. He wasn't that scared 6-year-old dodging the very adventure he craved, and once his dad carried him kicking and screaming to the canoe, petting a fish had felt something like touching slippery birthday cake frosting, a completely thrilling experience. Guadalupe reached toward him with the hand containing his change. He risked a glance up and extended his cup palm to accept it. As she tilted her fingers down and dropped the change in, their hands touched, and his heart beat faster. He thought, I have to, I want to, I'm going to. Nate's stomach twisted. He jabbed a straw into his shake and slurped. Thanks, Guada. Everyone in the shop heard a crash, and when Guadalupe looked over, Nate did too. He frowned at several tweens in matching plaid uniforms crouched over a dropped smartphone, its screen an intricate web of cracks. But Rachel's kid sister stood, her spine flagpole straight, holding up her phone. Hannah appeared to be recording a video. Nate's knees nearly buckled, and he leaned a hip into the counter for support. An audience, he thought, and it could grow. No, it would grow. Nate motioned to Hannah to stop, starting with a discreet shake of his head and escalating until he swatted the air like he was playing whack-a-mole with an imaginary mole. Hannah looked fierce as she rested her elbow on the bookshelf next to the games Candyland and Trouble. Nate made a director's cut gesture and then another. But Hannah didn't stop. She smirked. A raw, ragged feeling rose up in him like a panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. To ask Guadalupe out while the world watched. It felt like bicycling off a cliff, and there was no possible way he could manage that. He raised his hand to block Hannah, but she shifted slightly left. He held up a laminated menu between her smartphone and his face. She slapped it away. When his hand blocked her view a third time, Hannah clawed the inner part of his arm, leaving a jagged red stripe atop his ulna bone. As Nate retracted his arm, he let the menu drop, hugged his arm to his body, and pressed his fist into his collarbone. Jeez! Guadalupe's eyes narrowed. What's up with this? Nate wanted to run more than ever. He hooked his fingers over his collar and rested his chin on his knuckles. Guadalupe stood with her mouth half open, anticipating his response. It wasn't just her looks he liked, he thought. It was her. Like one time when there was a water leak in the ice cream shop, she was so chill, joking around as she mopped up the puddles while her Uncle Sal shut off the valve and called the plumber. He breathed in noisily and thought, I don't have to, but I really want to, and I'm taking my shot. Nate dropped his hand, bent his knees, retrieved the menu, and slipped it back in with the others. He thought, it's time. His car was hydroplaning and he steered into the skid. He exhaled, faced Guadalupe, and shrugged. Who even knows? When are you off, Guadalupe? She blinked twice. What? Wanna hit a movie together? He tapped a loose fist twice on his sternum. Catch one together. Together, ha-ha, taunted Hannah, miming a robot arm movement. You lame old loser. Guadalupe eyed Nate as the tip of her tongue shifted a little. Some spittle sprayed from Hannah's lips as she guffawed. Yeah, like you're going out with Cinderella. Nate glared at Hannah. You're such a snob. It's Guadalupe. He regarded Guadalupe. And if she says yes, I am. The left corner of his mouth twitched, flirting with a smile. Hannah kept recording. Are you joking, you jerk? It's been a week. A lousy week since you were macking on my sister. Best week of my life. Nate's gaze stayed on Guadalupe. Chillax, Hannah. Don't you have some vampires to smooch? He felt taller. Guadalupe, what do you say? Guadalupe gulped and bit her lower lip. Was this some kind of joke? Nate shook his head. Guadalupe pointed her finger from Hannah to him and back. Her upper lip trembled. Are you two playing a joke on me? It seemed like everyone in line was staring. Nate's throat felt all full of lumps. He felt scrutinized, being filmed and all. He needed to demonstrate his sincerity, but with all eyes on him, he didn't know how. His mind was laser-focused on that puzzle, how to make her see he was for real. And Nate forgot the seniors, the video, that they were standing on a floor, that they were breathing oxygen. In that moment, there was only Nate and Guadalupe and nothing and no one else. He reached toward Guadalupe with open palms. No joke. No, Guadalupe. Lupe. Guadalupe stepped back. Movies. You, me, tonight. That's it, Lupe. Or another time if you'd rather. Guadalupe's eyes narrowed for a moment. She leaned forward, picked up his wrist, and traced his scratch lightly with a fingertip. It burned, and Nate grimaced. Looks like she's no pal of yours, said Guadalupe. Nate shook his head. Guadalupe shifted her weight to one hip and parked a sassy hand on it. But what do you even know about me? Goose flesh crawled up Nate's left arm, and the curve of his smile flattened. What did he know? He rubbed his arm absently. He knew he kept thinking about her. What stuck in his mind were the moments where the look on her face made him suspect she knew a secret no one else was in on, and her unself-consciousness as she mouthed song lyrics. Around her, he felt more, like every cell in his body had its own heartbeat, but he couldn't say any of that. You stick in my... He tapped his head. I like your you... the way you are. Your A-W... The last part came out raspy. He cleared his desert of a throat. Guadalupe leaned into her hip. I'm A-W? Like awful? Like the root beer? He shook his head and swallowed. He made a fist and pressed it into the counter, then looked right at her. I failed my midterm because I was distracted, by thinking of you, and it's nearly impossible for me to feel bad when you're around. His fingernails bit into his palm. Guadalupe looked from Nate to the camera and back. A plus-sized teen in cornrows sang half a line in the chorus of an upbeat pop-punk song until a 10-year-old chubster next to her tapped her shoulder with his knuckles and she stopped. Nate smelled sweat as he forced himself to hold eye contact. Then Guadalupe grabbed his wrist, pulled him forward, and kissed him on the mouth. As their lips touched, every cell in his body flared with a whoosh of energy, each a tiny sun going supernova. As he leaned into the kiss, he stepped toward her, banging his hip on the counter. She tasted vaguely like a cherry Tootsie Roll Pop. He couldn't stop looking at her when their lips parted. The curve of her smile brought out a dimple. His face colored and he let out the breath he was holding. The tension in his throat dissolved as he sort of laughed. Guadalupe gripped Nate's upper arm as she sort of laughed with him. Hannah said, Holy crap. "This is better than the movie," said the chubster through his missing front teeth. Harmon appeared at Nate's side. "Yo-ho, Romeo." Harmon mimicked Nate's voice. "I'll wait in line, no prob. You took snowed us." Harmon tapped Nate on the shoulder with his knuckles, then grabbed the tray of floats and headed toward the table. Nate shrugged, touched the side of Guadalupe's face, and kissed her again. When their lips parted, he said, "Call me Nate." I would like to thank early readers of this story for invaluable comments, including Lori Donna Cruz, Stephen Wilson, Mary Summerday Scott, Dan Socker, and XEAO. Your encouragement means the world to me. Please also check out that published short story, Blue is for Boys, published in the UCSD Timber, a print publication that can be accessed online.